How about that? G'day, good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
We'll,
Were you there?
Yeah, I was there. We'll reconvene.
Terrific.
Yeah, he was.
If everyone can just grab a seat and a cuppa and get comfortable.
I don't think the reference to the college.
James O'Brien's my name. I'm the Acting State Manager for National Disability Services. NDS is the peak body for not-for-profit disability service providers across Australia. In Victoria, we have about 200 members, of which some here in the room today, including Terry Carroll, who's the CEO of PAST, who are just down the road, and Terry's also on our state committee. Look, I'm delighted to be at this forum today. I'd like to just acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we gather and pay my respects to elders past and present. Thank you to Malcolm and Frankston City Council. Great result, great venue, and I think the number of people here in attendance really does reflect the strong interest in disability in the community. Also acknowledge Danielle Green, the Shadow Minister for Disability Services. Welcome, Danielle. And also there are some representatives of Frankston City Council. I'm sorry I missed the person before. You might just want to give me a wave. No? Not here. Anyway, so look, we're going to kick off a panel discussion which is really to build on some of the presentations which you've just heard this morning from Leah, Bruce and John. Look, it's really fortunate to have Leah, Bruce and John really provide some different perspectives on the NDIS. And on today's panel we're joined also by Terry Carroll, who I've mentioned, local service provider CEO, and also Dr. Jane Tracy from Monash University. Jane's also on the Victorian Government's NDIS Advisory Taskforce. So what I'd like to do is kick off a broad-ranging discussion. There will be opportunities for questions from audience members, and I know people will have lots and lots of questions about the NDIS. I'd like to sort of preface my comments around the NDIS as saying is that we're sort of in a really unique position at the moment. We've got a great big promising policy reform which, if properly implemented, will make a huge difference to the lives of hundreds of thousands of Australians living with disability, their family members and carers. But we are sort of at a critical moment where we don't really have great certainty and a great level of detail either from the federal or state governments about exactly how this is going to roll out over the next few years. So we are really requiring people to take a leap of faith that the new system will be better than old. And as Bruce mapped out in his presentation, it certainly will be. So some of the things I'd just like to explore, and I'll kick off with a question to each panellist, and I might start with John here on my right and move up Leah, Terry, Bruce and Jane. It's really just to get a very, very brief sense of your aspirations and hopes for the NDIS and what it might mean for you and what it might mean more broadly.
I guess for me, it's all about maintaining the power I have as a consumer and a citizen in Australia. I think we've come a long way with regards to being able to make choices. So, and I'm pretty sure that I say that broadly too on behalf of families and siblings. It's all about, you know, it becoming a level playing field and acknowledging that we all contribute to society. It's all about feeling valued. And if this dirty word money helps, well, let's keep it going. But it's all, you know, so yeah, so it's just about maintain what we've strived for. Going back, you know, it all started back in 1981, International Year, where things really maintain, you know, it was a real kick-off back then. And showing my age, aren't I? But I don't forget 81, it was a big year.
Thanks, John. Leah?
Look, for me personally, I think I have a multiple disability. I was laughing earlier when Ken said, oh, some blind people get spoken to more loudly. I have a hearing impairment as well, and I feel a bit like a traitor to the cause. But what that also means is that I very much have the experience of being treated in bits. for my vision over here and my hearing over there, and the combined impact of the two of them isn't often addressed. So my personal hope for myself as a person with disability is that I'm seen as a whole person. As someone who works as a systemic advocate, I hope that the NDIS enables people with disability and their organisations, the ones that are controlled by and for people with disability, to have a better voice and a bigger say in how the system is designed. And on the whole, I hope that the system recognises the capacity of people with disability and starts to put the choice in their hands.
I have twofold aspirations. I'll start personally. I'm a wife of my husband Barry. He has multiple disabilities, and he has lived his life and in only the last probably 10 years where he's accessed the system of support, and currently that system is not sufficient for him. So we face the same struggles personally he does with his multiple disabilities. He has a physical disability and he also has a mental health issue which is quite chronic. That's the issue for us significantly. What I hope is that in the long term people won't have to go through the struggles that he has all his life. By the time the NDIS comes in, he'll be over the age of 65. So whilst he has received supports now, there'll be some questions around which system he goes into, whether it's the aged care or whether it will be under the NDIS, and whether he will receive the supports. That's a bit unknown for us, so we sit in the same basket as everyone else. But aspirationally, I don't want other people to go through the same struggles that he has and we have as a family. The NDIS promises some wonderful opportunities for better lives, and our life could have been a lot better had we had the right supports in place over 20 years. We've been married nearly 25 years. Professionally, aspirationally, I want our organisation, PAST, Peninsula Access Support and Training, to survive in this future of uncertainty. We have what we believe a great organisation currently as it stands today, but we have a lot of work to do in the future to ensure that the supports that we continue to provide for individuals and families and carers is the right supports that the people need, not in a system that has long-standing supported people that based on groups and not necessarily on individual needs. So, I'm looking forward to a future where we can respond appropriately to people as they require it, that we can support people who are adequately funded and for what their needs are, and that we can provide a workforce that is trained and able to respond to the needs of individuals as it requires. I could go on, but I'll keep passing it over.
Yeah. Look, from my point of view, the first thing is I want to see a system that's fair. To me, the fact that where you live or how your disability occurred or your ability to advocate determines what you get. It just really sticks in my craw, that. And I first became interested in this scheme when, and sort of how we could reform disability when I visited one of Urala's early intervention services out near Dandenong, and I was sat down with a mother with a young child with a disability, and she said to me, "Oh, look, why can't my son get the early intervention services that he needs?" And if she'd been living where I live in Baldwin, she would have got the services that she needed. And, because she lived where she did and she came from a culturally diverse background and she couldn't advocate, she didn't. And I responded to this by sort of explaining what we were doing to try and help her, and then I sort of went away and was sort of deeply ashamed by the fact that I was sort of justifying this crap system that we've got. And so fairness to me is the critical thing, and that fairness is built around an adequate and fair level of support. The other aspiration that I've got is that opportunities to create a new system come along very rarely in life, and the opportunity to help shape that system comes along even more rarely. And so we've all got the opportunity to create something very special here. And, you know, when Ken referred to Simon Duffy's comments, which were largely critical of what is going on, and I say, well, isn't this fantastic that here's this expert in control who's in Australia wanting us to get the best possible system that we can, you know, and we're all watching this, but the world is also watching what we're doing here. You know, this whole attempt to apply insurance principles to disability. So we sort of stand at a quite unique moment, and I just hope we're up to the challenge and we deliver on that promise.
Well, I already think that the NDIS has made a huge difference to our community in raising the profile and the rights of people with disability within our community. The discussions that have happened at a political level and at a community level and in our press around disability that have been sparked by the whole movement around the NDIS, I think have already provided a profound, or created a profound shift in our community where people with disabilities have a much greater profile and a much greater value as members of the community than was so before these discussions began. So I already think we're partly on the way, even before the first package is decided upon. What do I want from the scheme? Well, let me put three hats on in succession. At first, a personal hat. I have a son with multiple disabilities who lives in supported accommodation. For him, I want greater control and choice in his life. For him, I want some ability to be able to choose who provides care for him, and to fire the ones that don't do a good enough job and don't share his jokes. So for him, I want greater choice and control. And for us as his family, I want the certainty and the hope that is provided by knowing that his needs will be met throughout his lifetime, and when I become too infirm and I die, that his care will still be of a high quality and continue beyond my lifetime. I work in the health sector. Professionally, I work at a place called the Centre for Developmental Disability Health Victoria, and what we try and do is to make the health system, to build the capacity in the health system to better address and meet the needs of people with disabilities. And already in that sector I can see, at the moment it's fear and concern because they're not quite sure what to do, but at least there's awareness of a problem, which is a difference, exactly. The contrast is previously when people with disabilities were kind of invisible to those running the health sector, and now there's a greater awareness of, hey, we actually have to address the needs of people who have disabilities, and how do we do that? And from our point of view as an academic unit set up to support health services, we have more people approaching us and saying, can you provide some in-service training, can you give us some support into how we can better meet the needs of people with disabilities? So that's fantastic, I think. We need to do a lot more work in that space, and I was talking to Bruce earlier about that Tier 2 level support under the Productivity Commission framework, and how we can build capacity in our mainstream services within our community to better address the needs of people who have diverse needs. And thirdly, as a member of the Victorian NDIS Taskforce, what I'm looking forward to doing is to contributing to, as Bruce says, the opportunity here to create something in Victoria and in Australia that that provides a fair and equitable system and provides an opportunity for an enhanced quality of life for everybody with a disability, and therefore for our communities as a whole. So I am excited and optimistic by the opportunities that lie in front of us.
Thanks, Joan. Look, it's great to hear so much hope and aspiration for the future, but with all of these potentially very positive reforms, there's always some obstacles and challenges which need to be overcome. And I'd be really interested to hear from panellists about what you consider to be, you know, the top 2 or 3 obstacles or challenges which the government and the new launched Transition Authority need to really get on top of to ensure that the NDIS is both properly designed, but some of the capacity issues can be dealt with to make sure it actually works on the ground. So maybe starting with John, if there's anything that springs to mind immediately about some of the most looming challenges you think need to be dealt with.
I guess where comes money comes power, and it gets back to who are the experts, who are the champions. And I guess one of my fears would be to start heading back towards a medical model where you get health professionals saying, well, we've been doing it for many years, this is the best way for this person to be looked after. So I hope I'm really wrong, but I think it really gets back to the individual and the families to be respected as knowing what needs they have, and health professionals, occupational therapists, physios, speechies, all of those people to say, let's work in calibration to make sure that your goal's achieved, because it is very, very easy, and we're sort of seeing this now in the sector around individualised funding approaches where service providers are saying, well, how do I get a piece of this? And having that balance. So that's just one of those things I throw out there.
Leah?
I can think of 2 challenges. The first one is around making sure that we give people with disability meaningful choice. And so that's about, you know, making sure we don't set up a model that is predicated on the idea that people with disability do risky things and that's bad. We need to have a model where people with disability can be engaged in making choices in their own lives, in learning to make choices, in understanding what it is to be a good consumer, and in having the information that they need and the time and the access to supports that they need in order to make their own choices. I think that's a central challenge. And I think as a secondary challenge, there's the issue of long-term implementation of the scheme. At the moment, we have launch sites which are budgeted to run up until 2015. It's great that we've now got some legislation, but we don't know how the funding's going to roll out beyond 2015, whether there's money in the pot to take this more broadly. And we also don't know whether and when Western Australia and Queensland are going to come on board to make this a truly national scheme. So but if you want to move from Victoria to Western Australia, and I'm not quite sure why you would, you would be able to get access to the same sorts of supports over there as you can here under an NDIS, which is part of the point.
The couple of challenges I see from a provider point of view is the government investing in providers to move to make the changes that they need to make necessary what an NDIS is going to bring about. Providers that currently work in a system also where it's underfunded, that they don't have all of the necessary requirements in place currently. So going forward, there's an awful lot of work that needs to be done to support people to enable what choices that they will make. Things like systems for financial reporting on an individual level. So that's it's quite sophisticated accounting systems. You need the skilled people within the organisations to be able to implement those. So there's a whole raft of organisational things that need to be done, that the government need to invest and support organisations, because there are some great services out there that are currently mainstream, and we would hate to lose those services. The sector still needs to have them in place going forward. The demand is going to grow, so to lose those services would be an absolute shame. Secondly, that goes hand in hand, I think, is workforce. We really need to invest in a workforce. We're not going to have enough people that are going to be available to deliver the supports that are going to be necessary. We need trained people, or we need people that are responsive to the needs. So when I talk about training, it's not necessarily about the piece of paper or the qualification, but people with the right attitude and ability to work with individuals and families that understand the needs, that can respond to those needs, that are going to be working in a very, very different way to which they currently are today. And there's going to be a lot of need and investment in to workforce to get people to be able to sustain this new way of life. Yeah.
Thanks, Terry.
Look, I agree with everything that's been said, but I'll add two additional challenges. I think the first just relates to the funding of the scheme, which is not yet secure. And, I think governments are going to face, there's going to be a moment of truth here around government commitment to this scheme, which will either come on Friday or at the next COAG meeting following it early in the new year, where governments are going to have to be held to account and they're going to have to deliver. And, all the indications are that the Commonwealth Government is ready to make its commitment, and the states are going to have to make matching commitments in order to get this done. Because I think from the perspective of us, we don't really mind. We elect these governments, we pay our taxes, and they need to sort out how this is going to get funded, but it does need to get done. So I think, and until it's done and until the funding program for the full rollout is clear, that's unfinished business. I think the second, and will remain challenging until it's done, I think the second challenge is the way this scheme will interface with other critical support systems, with health, with education, with employment and with housing. And just because of the demographic, the ages of people in this room, let me just talk about housing as a very specific and very challenging issue. There have been two reasons why people with disabilities, by and large, have had to remain at home. And I'm talking here about people born with disabilities. One is because the cost of providing them with the personal care and support they need has not been available, and the second is because the bricks and mortar have not been available. Suitable housing, affordable housing has not been available. The NDIS will provide that personal care and support, so no longer will people be necessarily reliant on families doing it informally. But the bricks and mortar will not be provided, and the disability system is currently sort of Leah described as broke and broken. Well, public housing is even more broke and broken, if that's possible. So the whole question about where the funding will come from to provide housing to people where family resources are limited is a big challenge. Will it be shared equity models? Will it be affordable housing? Will it be public housing? Will we be able to encourage families who've got the capacity to provide the housing for themselves and others to do so? And that is a part of the jigsaw that's just not solved. Having said that, let me say it's something that a number of us are focusing on, but it is a major challenge, as are the other interfaces.
Thanks, Jane.
First, I'd like to just put another perspective to what John said earlier about the medical model. I absolutely agree with him that we don't want to go to a system where people are only seen through the lens of their disabilities and their impairments. I absolutely I think that's very important and essential. But what happened with the disability movement some decades ago when the social model came into its ascendancy was that the health needs of people with disabilities were neglected, and health professionals were left out of the team of people who could provide some input into people's lives. And for all of us, our optimal quality of life depends on us feeling well. If we're in pain and if we're ill, it undermines our quality of life. And so I would just like to keep the balance there, that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, that we keep a focus on people's health and well-being as a part of their total life aspirations and goals, as it is for all of us to feel as well as we can. So just wanted to add that a different perspective to that medical model conversation, which I know is quite prominent at the moment, and particularly around who should be care planners and that sort of thing. But we just need not to lose the expertise of health professionals. One of my concerns is the expectations that people have of an NDIS, that some people seeing it as the answer to all of our social problems, and as Bruce has alluded to in relation to housing, it's not going to fix everything, and it's not going to fix everything for everyone. And it's a tremendous step forward in our society, but it doesn't take us to utopia. And we need to manage those expectations so that there doesn't a dark cloud of disappointment and doesn't start to blot out the sunlight of this change. And I don't want people to feel we need, as we talk about an NDIS, to be always talking about the scheme as a whole, the tier, the way the Productivity Commission envisaged it was tier 1, 2 and 3, and it's a whole scheme. It's not about whether people win a package or lose, whether they've over that line into tier 3 or otherwise they've lost. We need to somehow paint this picture and keep on painting it, because as people engage more and more in this discussion, new questions come up, but see it as a total response in the community.
Thanks, Jane. Bruce, I might ask you a question and then lead up to, or happy to take any further contributions from the audience on this, but so the money is obviously at the heart of the reform, and without a substantive investment. So the Productivity Commission envisaged that the fund, that the scheme, once fully funded and operational, will be about $15 billion per year. At the moment, the current level of funding across the country for disability services is about $7 billion. So we're talking about a large increase over time. Bruce, be interested in your views as to how we can better make the argument to politicians that disability should be seen as an investment rather than a cost. And on that, the Productivity Commission had sort of taken a view that the Commonwealth really should become the dominant funder of disability services under the NDIS. I'd be interested in your view about what the role of the states might be potentially into the future. So, sort of slightly complex question, but be interested in your views on that, and if that does generate any discussion from the audience, I'm happy to take some questions there for the panel.
Okay. Look, thank you, James. And look, can I just say I was approached by a number of people during the break asking about a copy of my presentation in the slides. They will be available they'll be available because Malcolm's, I think, going to email everyone at the end of today's session, letting them know that the video that's being recorded here is going to be on the Every Australian Counts website, but attached to that he will attach that PowerPoint presentation of mine. So that will give you the detailed information that I provided. But just to go to James's two questions, look, there's no doubt that this scheme is an investment, and the reason I say that is that one has to look at what disability is likely to cost governments if we don't introduce this scheme. And some work's been done on that by PricewaterhouseCoopers, and if you extrapolate the current trends, then disability, instead of costing an additional $7.5 or $8 billion, will cost an additional $27 to $37 billion. And the reason for that is that what's happening today is that people's independence is not being maximised, and they're moving into government support, often in a state of crisis and in a situation where they're less able to look after themselves than they could. So if we let these trends continue, ultimately the cost to government will be much greater. There's another dimension to it, which is that if people can work, then two things happen. First of all, they become taxpayers. but also their support needs decline. And the reason, and you can see this in workers' compensation schemes, the reason that workers' compensation schemes work so hard to get people back to work is for their own good, so that they get that sense of pride and achievement that comes from work. Work is such a fundamental part of our makeup and well-being. So if people get out to work, they're not sitting at home thinking about what disability service they might want to consume. And you get employment benefits as well. The Productivity Commission summed this all up by saying that the economic benefits of the scheme will far outweigh the costs, and that over time this scheme will add around 1% to GDP, will boost employment by more than 220,000 people, which is really important at a time when our population is ageing. We've got people in the disability sector who want to work, have the capacity to work, but they can't work because of this, they can't get the support needs that they need. So this has been, you know, what started really as a social policy reform has become an economic reform. And the reason, one of the reasons I think that the scheme has been able to get the traction it has in terms of the public policy debate is that so much of the discussion about public policy now is framed in economic terms. So it's been able to move into the mainstream of policy discussion. The question about what is the role of the states in all of this and what the Productivity Commission envisaged is they envisaged a scheme that was national, state and local. What's important locally is that people get the support they need in their local community. What's important at a state level is that much of the expertise around our current disability systems about what's working best is at the state level, and that the interactions we've talked about with health and education are primarily at a state level. So there needs to be that presence as well as national consistency. What every person I speak to tells me is that they want a national eligibility criteria. They want nationally consistent benefits and they want portability. While people may not wish to move to Western Australia, they may want to go to Queensland, you know, and because it's warmer. So, you know, and people, you know, if people want to be able to move to get a job, they want to move closer to family. They sometimes want to move away from family. You know, these are normal things, you know, and so this is about normalising disability. But to the question about how this scheme is funded, there was a very, you know, the Productivity Commission was very clear that the best way of funding this scheme would be for the scheme to actually trigger a reform of Commonwealth state taxes. The states would give up some very inefficient taxes they have, and the Commonwealth would replace them with very efficient taxes. Efficiency in the tax system is sort of the economist's dream, which you don't need to worry too much about, but essentially efficient taxes are things like GST and income tax. And the Commonwealth has the powers to raise those revenues. So that's what the Productivity Commission recommended. Their role is to recommend the first best system. But tax reform in this country is incredibly difficult to achieve. It's always been very difficult to achieve. So the idea that the NDIS would be the catalyst for tax reform, I've always thought of as very aspirational. So I think what's more likely to happen is that the Commonwealth and states will share the funding because they've all agreed that disability is a shared responsibility. And you want to bring together in the design and rollout of this scheme both Commonwealth and state expertise, and already I think you can see the benefits of it in the way the scheme's been developing over the last 12 months. Ultimately, it would be very nice, I think, if we could end where the Productivity Commission recommended, but I don't think we're going to get there in one step. But ultimately, I think it's an aspiration we should all have. And the reason I think it should be an aspiration is that when you look at the way the Commonwealth and the states argue about the health system, which is jointly funded, very few of us, I think, would hold that up as a best practice model.
Thanks, Bruce. There's a couple of roving microphones getting around, so if anyone's got a question just about the broad financing of the scheme and some of the politics, very happy to take that. I think we've got someone over here. Rebecca, thanks.
Thank you.
Maybe just name, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. My name's Jen. It's lovely to hear you all speak, and congratulations on all the work you're doing. My question's around what changes will the NDIS bring to the funding structure of group homes and for people living in group homes?
Oh, look, I might have a crack at it first. I think a number of people will have a view on it. Those houses are block funded, and the question is, how does that get unpacked? And you know, we've seen at a state level that things like day services have shifted to individualised packages, but the issues around houses are sort of much more complex. I think particularly in those cases where the service provider both owns the property and provides the service in that particular property. So the first thing I'd like to see is a separation of that, so we get specialisation in the management of the property, and then one gets specialisation in service provision. Just how that's going to happen, I think we're all sort of waiting and seeing. I mean, ultimately, I think that people, there should be two things that people should be able to choose. The first is they should be able to choose who they live with, rather than being told who's going to move in tomorrow. And I sort of quite like the Dutch system where when a vacancy occurs, people advertise and then they interview, and you actually choose people who you might want to have a common interest rather than some other basis. The second point I'd make is that the model for selecting people today is very medically based. So we tend to group people who've got cerebral palsy, or we group people who've got complex behaviours, and then we wonder why they don't get on. It's because they probably didn't have a lot in common in the first place. And so I think, so the first thing is I think there should be choice around who you live with, and I think the second thing is that there should be choice about who provides the services in that house. Now, yeah, so... NDIS, well, how will it... Will
this result in that block-funded model becoming individualised and giving people
look,
options?
I hope so. Well, it must. Let me be much more categorical. It must, okay? Just how that happens, I'm still not sure. You know, will it be... you know, I think at some point governments are going to say, look, we're tendering the services in that house. You know, you can rebid. It's much more complex, though, if you own the property and, you know, that happens. So it'll take some unpacking. We've actually looked at this at Uralla, so we've sort of asked the question, could we, should we no longer be the owners of the properties that we currently own? Because it's, you know, we don't think property management is a core competence of the organisation. But we can't give, I mean, this might come as a surprise, but, you know, when we look to see whether we could create, you know, we could perhaps transfer those properties to an affordable housing association, because then they would have it on their balance sheet, and then maybe they would be able to leverage those properties because they'd be able to borrow against them. They weren't interested. So
I think maybe we've learnt that group homes aren't always the best answer.
No, look, I agree with that too.
Yeah,
You know,
and I guess, you know, I'm curious about the work that's been done around sorting out once and for all that block funding, because it's holding so many people back. It's disabling people to live a life of their own dreams because they're stuck in that system. So I would have thought that would be a really important part of the work that's been done.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I think there's a lot of work, there's a lot of thinking and work going on around how you bundle all of that. I think the other point that's sort of really important here is, and goes to that point about disabling, is the physical design of the houses. You know, that these are houses that really push people together rather than much more individualised, you know, living units with, you know, which might be co-located on the one site but actually provide for much more independence. And certainly the, you know, the sort of what I would describe as the cutting edge, the more cutting edge work that, you know, we're doing at Uralla, but others organisations done, are creating much more individualised living solutions where that issue, you know, is less difficult because of the physical house design. So that also needs work on. So as the housing stock, you know, one of the things I would hope is that as existing housing stock is replaced, it's replaced with much more appropriate housing in terms of design, in terms of location, close to shops and public transport and those sorts of things. Because if you think about the investment approach, you can actually save enormous, if you get those design and location issues right, you actually end up with much lower support costs on an ongoing basis, and it's a good investment.
Thank you.
Any other panellists like to contribute to that discussion on housing? No?
Well, I kind of said it before, but
Yeah.
Yes, my son's in a group home, and just to echo the need for him to be able to choose a lifestyle that suits him with the support that he wants, and for he's lived there for nearly 4 years now, and he probably would probably want to continue living with those people because that's a familiar environment for him, but he would certainly want a much more individualised sort of life. Whereas I know others well who would certainly choose to move out of the house that they're in and don't want anything more to do with the people that they're living with. Yeah.
I guess I question whether that's our biggest step away from deinstitutionalisation into truly community living, and I think it's one that's neglected. But those conversations.
Yes, and community living has the aspect of community as well, so we have to do a lot of work on the community side of that as well, of course.
I'll probably just add, look, I concur, and I think there's an awful lot of work that needs to go in, and it is underway, but I think from a day service provider where we provide, traditional day services or group activities, but we also do individual support, we're very hamstrung by the supports that we can provide to those people who live in group homes. So it is difficult. But what I do say in the interim, it's about having an open mind and working with accommodation services and other providers to make the best of what isn't a great situation right now, and looking at how can we be more flexible and make something work for individuals who are in that situation. So until it comes to fruition, and I believe, like Bruce, it absolutely has to, otherwise, you know, it's going to be a bit of a mockery, really. Only a certain amount of people will have certain, you know, empowerment and control over their life, and others won't. So I believe it will come in, but it's going to take a long time. But there is work that we can be doing in the short term to support people to have better opportunities than what they currently have. Okay. It's about working together.
I think there's also an opportunity to develop, you know, new and quite innovative support models, you know, key ring models, all these sorts of things. You know, I think, you know, one of the things that, you know, is, if you like, underpinning the economic case here is that, you know, the constrained choice is and the crisis in which things happen is driving people to high-cost solutions. You know, there are lots of people living in CRUs with 24-hour care who don't actually need that, you know, and who would have much better quality lives because they can be more independent, you know. And, you know, I would like to see, you know, a lot of innovation in that space. Part of it could be driven by the NDIA, but part of it will be driven by individuals, you know, who will take their support packages and use it in ways that people have just not dreamt about.
I think we had a question down the back. Was it Nigel?
Yes, Nigel Caswell from People with Multiple Sclerosis. I understand that the proposed scheme is intended to be not means tested, but I also know that that's a concept which not everybody agrees with. So I was interested in why it should not be means tested, and what will that actually mean?
So any panellists like to have a crack at that first? It's a Bruce. Bruce.
Sorry, what's the question? The question's about means testing.
Yeah, appropriateness of means testing. Why it should be or why it shouldn't be.
Okay. I think the issue around means testing needs to be looked at in the broader context of our social security system. Okay, and I go back to the pension review that this government undertook in 2008. That was the catalyst for that was advocacy by the aged care sector, by national seniors in particular, arguing that people who were on the age pension and receiving maximum benefit were living in poverty, and they were arguing that the age pension needed to rise as a result of that. The age pension, as you know, and the disability support pension are set in exactly the same way. What surprised FAXIA and the Department of Family, Housing and Community Services that was responsible for that review, and Jeff Harmer in particular, who headed the review, was that people on the disability support pension, on average, are even poorer than people on the age pension. And you might say, well, that's probably no surprise given we know what the costs of disability are. So the approach that was agreed was that, well, both the age pension and the disability support pension are income replacement. They're about providing people with income replacement at time when they cannot work, either because of age or because of disability, and they face what you might call normal costs. Okay, so the NDIS is designed to augment the support someone receives in the event of significant disability, and it will not be means tested. Okay, and that's because the costs are so great. The only additional point I make is that this scheme needs to interface with the aged care system and the way we provide support to people who are aged, and that is means tested. So when I said earlier that this scheme you'll be eligible to participate in the scheme if you acquire a significant disability before the age of 65, you'll continue to receive NDIS benefits after the age of 65, but the funding source will shift from disability to aged care, and because that funding has shifted to aged care, there will be, I expect, the details haven't been sorted out, but I would expect there will be some means testing after the age of 65. And the reason for that is about equity. So anybody who's had a disability from birth, I would expect would, and not had a big compensation payout where there's money left over, would continue to get full services. But if you imagine someone who's had a full working life and acquires a very severe disability at age 64, they should not continue to get benefits on a non-means tested basis for the rest of their lives, whereas someone who acquired exactly the same disability at 66 would be subject to a means test. So that's the only difference that will occur after the age of 65. The other point, Terry, you made the comment about what about someone who's going to be over 65 by the time the NDIS comes to them. Most people in that group will be covered through what's called the grandfathering clauses within the legislation. So anyone who's been receiving services under the National Disability Agreement, and then, by the time the NDIS comes to them as age 66, they would still be eligible for the NDIS.
Yes, gentleman in the middle there.
Hi, Nick Jones from the Frankston-Mornington Peninsula Medicare Local. I've got a question about what we need to do in this area to get the NDIS trial, for the next trial site to be in this area. So we've got the one in Barwon, Victoria. What can we do to have the next one in Frankston and Mornington?
Well, it's a terrific question, and I travel frequently with my job, and I visit. I was in Werribee a couple of weeks ago, talking to people with disability, family members, and carers, and Werribee's 40 k's from Geelong, perhaps not even that, and I couldn't give anyone there any confidence about when the NDIS would come up the road. So. It could cross the bay, but in Victoria at the moment, and I think as Bruce may have said, we're running the risk of repeating some of the mistakes of the past, that we have a postcode lottery, and the postcode for Geelong is, I think, 3220, so if you draw that one, you're in luck, but not necessarily the case over here. So, Jane, do you want to have a crack at that one first, in terms of, sorry to put you on the spot, but what might need to be done to sort of expand the launch out of Barwon and potentially...
Frankston's next. Jane, how do we get Frankston number one on... number two cab?
Oh, that's an easy question. The answer's 42, I think. That's... well, I don't think there will be new launch sites. There'll be the full scheme rolling out. Yeah. So the 5 launch sites are meant to provide an opportunity for learning, really. Yes, they are going to roll out on the 1st of July next year, and they will be far from perfect. There'll be all sorts of hitches that we know about now and that we don't anticipate, and they provide a really valuable opportunity for learning. And my hope, and I would think the hope of everybody on this panel here, and in fact everybody in the room, is that after that we will just go to a full scheme. So Frankston will certainly be included then. So that's why Medicare locals really need to focus on people with disabilities and improving health services for people with disabilities.
If I can just add,
and
though,
Peninsula might just sort of lead the way there.
Yeah. If I can just add, also I think that it is about getting as many people not just think that because the launch sites are up, we've got to keep the momentum going. We absolutely have to, and Frankston in this area needs to rally together and get as many people, if not everyone, signed up to the NDIS and show the strength and support that this community has in making sure that it continues on. So I know that we're doing that, but it has been a real slog to get people to get onto a computer or onto the website and commit to it. And we've done lots ourselves around getting the petitions and getting people to sign. So I think everyone in this room, if we can go away, if you haven't got your friends and family and everyone to sign up, go away and do that. Just keep going, having those conversations with the local members, just continuing the fight. So we just need to keep going.
I'd just like to add about the importance of the campaign, and that the campaign will continue to be important even after this scheme has been introduced and the promises have been made. Because the funding roughly equates to an extra $1 billion a year for the next 6 or 7 years. By the time we get to the 7th year, all the political advantage of making this investment will have long been spent. But that last $1 billion, in fact the last dollar, is going to be just as important as the first dollar, because otherwise we don't have an equitable scheme. If we end up with a scheme where people are excluded because there's not enough money, then we'll be back in the world we're in today, where people are trying to prove how disabled they are in order to get support, rather than how capable they are and what their opportunities are. So the number one thing that everyone can do is to get people signed up on the website. Talk to your friends, talk to your family, have the brochures in your Medicare local office. No appointment without being signed up. It could be a new rule. You could be excluded from Medicare if you haven't signed up for disability care. I mean, that would be revolutionary. I mean, you could promote that throughout the medical profession. So I think there's some opportunities here for everybody. Ultimately, this is about fairness, and I've got great confidence in the fairness of this community. And we could, once the funding has been allocated, one can then have, an adult conversation about who's most needy. Because, I've talked to people and they said, look, I can wait, but what I want to know is that when I'm too old, when I'm too frail, the support will be there. So I think a lot of the issues about who's going to go first, who's going to go second, people are very decent in this sector. I mean, I think the extraordinary thing I see is just how modest people are when it comes to what their needs are. And so I think, I don't want Frankston to be in front of Werribee, but I would certainly want the most needy in Frankston, the most needy in Werribee, to know that the support's there and that those for whom they need it just round the corner, it'll also be there.
Bruce, just a question to you, if I may. It's in relation to during the trial phase. It is going to be about monitoring and how are we going to manage the media? Because if there's some good stories coming out of the trial, the media don't want to know about it. If there are people not getting the money or failing or making mistakes, the media is going to be right onto it. So I just see that as a real challenge for us as Australians. We're not going to hear the good news stories. We're only going to hear the bad ones. So I'm just wondering, as part of the campaign, and you might even want to comment yourself, but are we trying to, this has all come about because we've spoken about the system being broken, which is good. So we're all talking about it at the barbecue on Sundays as a group of people who may not be, disability doesn't affect them. We know about it. But as during the trial, with some good things happening where lives are getting better, media don't want to know that. They're going to want to know, why is it still failing? So I guess it's a hard question, but it worries me a little bit that we're not going to pick up and monitor the good stuff that's going to come out of this.
Yeah, look, a couple of things. I think Jane has been at pains to point out that, and rightly, that we've got to set expectations right here. This is not going to fix everything, and certainly won't fix everything overnight. So I think we've got to be really clear about expectations, and I think we're also going to need to talk with people in the launch sites about all of this, and work through it with the government. We all want this to be a success, and I think we want it, but I think we want it balanced. I guess what I would say is we want balance here. In the way this is going to be looked at, because I think what the Australian community will want to know is that this is the investment is working, and we've got to maintain their confidence and their support.
Leah, did you have a comment?
Yeah. I just want to say I think I agree with what Bruce has just said. I mean, NDIS is not a silver bullet. It's not going to change things overnight, and that is a slow process, and that's a challenge in terms of public perception. But I think on the positive side, we're talking about media perception influencing community perception, but actually the goal of the NDIS is to include people with disability within the community. And so some of this will be just about the simplicity of people with disability being out in the community, on the streets, in jobs, in offices, in local community groups, in theatre groups, doing things alongside people who don't have disabilities. And I think that's where the community will be able to measure the effects of the NDIS, hopefully.
There's a couple of questions. Maybe Annabelle, you were first, and we might go to the two at the back. So Annabelle, do you want to go first? And yeah.
Thanks. Hi. I'm wondering. I'm trying to get a job. I've been trying to get a job for about 3 or 4 years now, and I'm just wondering with the how the providers are going to be, because at the moment with disability employment services, they're in 2 streams. Are they still going to be in 2 streams? Like, there's one stream where there's ongoing support for people with disabilities, and then there's another stream that they're only in with a provider for 18 months, and then 6 months if they are successful in getting a job. So I'm just wondering how that's going to work.
Okay, can I just have a crack at that? Just to say, look, I think I did mention that the way the NDIS interfaces with employment is a big issue. As you know, the Disability Employment Service rating system relies on two measures, one on efficiency and one on effectiveness. But in truth, they are throughput models. It's about getting people into any job as quickly as possible and then hoping and praying that they're still there in 6 months' time. And, you know, the objective of the DES, as set by DUA, is at direct odds with what the NDIS is about. The NDIS is about lifetime goals and careers. And how we get the DES to match up better with the NDIS is a major challenge. I've got two suggestions. The first is that I think the NDIA in its annual report should be required to report on the interfaces with complementary systems, so that, you know, it at a systemic level looks at these sorts of issues. You can report what it's not doing for you, but that doesn't change anything in the same way as an agency reporting on these interfaces can do. So I think that's the first thing. So I've actually got three things. The second thing is that I think that the statement of personal goals that will be an integral part of this, and then the statement of support needs, should include things like the support that an individual would need at school or to access education or to access work. So it makes it very clear that, you know, there are things that the NDIS will not be doing but which still are essential in terms of reaching those goals, which I think has then got the potential to be used by local area coordinators and others to advocate for those supports. But the third thing that I think would make an enormous difference is that in the Disability Employment Service star rating system, there is, for example, an additional weight that's placed on successfully finding a job for a person from an Indigenous background. Okay, you know, they give them an extra weight because it's, you know, often much more complex. People in Tier 3 are going to be typically much more complex to get jobs for. Now, a simple way would be to put an additional weighting on people who are in Tier 3.
Sorry, I guess it's also, it all comes down to changing people's perceptions of disability. I guess, like, for me, I find that when I tell someone I've got cerebral palsy, they immediately think I'm in a wheelchair when I'm not. How is that happening within organisations that should be employing people with disabilities?
I completely agree with you, but the perception among the community of people with disability is a real challenge in, you know, our participation in a whole range of areas of life. And that's something that the Productivity Commission considered when they went around and spoke to lots of people. Everybody said to them, you know, perception is such a big problem. So as part of the work that the National Disability Insurance Agency will be able to do will be around some general community awareness raising, and some of that work around looking at changing attitudes of people towards people with disabilities.
I'm mindful we're sort of running out of time, but just maybe one question, fella down the back or lady down the back, or yeah, or maybe two quick ones. Yeah.
Jobs. Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, so very similar questions, similar concerns, and to continue with ongoing training and pathways for those people.
Would anyone like to make a contribution on that?
Can somebody repeat the question.
Yeah, could you repeat the question, please?
Oh, my
Is that all right? Sorry.
I was just saying, along the similar lines of what the lady up the front said as far as concerns how we're going to support people into employment, how we're going to support people in ongoing education and training for their pathways, so it's purposeful and meaningful for them, and the key word ongoing.
I'll go this.
Oh, John first and then.
Yeah. I guess, as we've been mentioning in the past, it is still going to be about a person's plan. And if we've got really clear goals with the right language that everybody can understand, and it's been written well, and it's really sad that we've got to write out a plan about our life, but unfortunately we're living in that society at the moment. So it's about identifying employment as one of the goals, and about being a valued community member, wanting to give back. So it's plain English type stuff like that, that are going to, I guess, not be alarm bells, but be a guide to our pathway. And I feel confident that the NDIS will acknowledge and respect a person's past and what they've achieved, and will build on that.
I think the interaction between the NDIS and some other systems like employment and education is one of those big questions and one of those big challenges, as Bruce mentioned earlier, about how the scheme is going to work. And I think, you know, it's a challenge particularly because we have the Disability Discrimination Act, and the Disability Discrimination Act says, you know, education providers have to support people with disability. It's their obligation under the law, it's their responsibility. Employers have to support you if you have a disability. And we know that the reality is that, you know, often on the ground, in schools, in training providers, in workplaces, that's not what happens. But the point is that it should be what happens, and we don't want those organisations or those education providers to shirk from their responsibility in creating an NDIS. But at the same time, I think the NDIS has some potential to make the path into employment and into education and training opportunities for people with disability easier. And that's partly through making sure that, you know, we do plan well, that when we sit down and do plans for support, we're looking at the person as a whole. But it's also then that some of the barriers for people getting into education and training that leads to employment or into employment itself are things that are missing because they're not getting adequate supports at the moment. So, you know, somebody might not be able to access a computer that is going to meet their physical needs or their needs because they've got a sensory disability in order to even just begin looking for work and writing up resumes and those sorts of things. NDIS may be able to assist them with that sort of equipment. So there's lots of barriers that the NDIS will be able to kind of remove that aren't even necessarily about the education and employment systems directly.
Can I just add a point about the power of insurers to change social attitudes? Because I think this is really one of the big differences between this scheme and what we've had up to now. And to understand the power of what insurers can do, you only have to look at our communities and the history of our fire brigades. You know, they were established by the building insurers, who each had their own fire trucks that went around. And in fact, what used to happen was that the fire alarm would go off, the first truck would go out, and they'd say, "It's not my building," and they'd go past. And, you know, then they worked out that the insurers worked out that by actually creating a fire brigade, which not only looked after their buildings but all buildings, they could reduce costs and, in effect, provide a safety net for all property owners. You look at what's happened with the Transport Accident Commission here, you know, in the early 1970s, I think there were something like 12 or 1,300 Victorians being killed on our roads each year. If you'd said that in 2012 it'll only be 350 people when the state population is twice what it was back then, people would have said you were dreaming. But, you know, the Transport Accident Commission set out to change driver attitudes. You know, they said when you drive your car, you wear a seatbelt. When you drive, you don't drink. So these are quite profound changes. You know, thank God our 18-year-olds now get in the car with their mates and they say, well, who's driving tonight? Because they're not drinking. Now, most of us didn't do that. So I don't quite know how the NDIA will do it, but I'm absolutely convinced that in 30 years' time it will be seen to have been an enormously powerful changer of behaviours and attitudes to people with disabilities.
Look, I'm mindful of time. I think we promised to get you out of here by 1 o'clock, so would you join me in thanking the panellists? It's been a terrific discussion. There's lots of hope and lots of promise around the NDIS, and as Bruce says, hopefully in 30 years' time we'll reflect on it as being, just a fundamental reform. But obviously, lots of questions. So I'll hand back to Ken now for the closing comments, and thank you all for coming. Thank you.
Thanks. And just as importantly, every one of you have come along. The most common, in closing today's proceedings, I'm going to summarise just a few of the highlights that I've gleaned from the presentations and the panel discussions, which I'm sure we've all found thought-provoking. First, though, events such as today's don't transpire without months of meticulous planning. So it's fitting that before we all go on our way, I give everybody an opportunity to show your appreciation for this NDIS Forum's working group, which comprises the members of Frankston City Council's Disability Access and Inclusion Committee, alongside the Council's hard-working staff. I don't use that form of words to suggest that the Council has any staff who are not hard-working. Of course, they all are. Yes, I was told to say that. In particular, having warmed up your applause units, I ask you to acknowledge the work of the planning group, and I'd like each of you to identify yourselves so that we know whom we're thanking. Anthea Haynes-Smith. There we go. Peter Rice. Peter, thank you very much. Jill Fowler. Oh, she's left. Well, thank her anyway. Teresa Seeley. All right, well, we'll thank her anyway. And Kate Somerville. There we go. It's equally true that today would not have been the success it has been without the strategic input over many months of Malcolm Merritt. Frankston's Metro Access and Community Development Officer, for those of you who are into the titles. There we go. Now, I hope you'll bear with me while I try to distill very quickly the essence from the many thousands of wise words of experience and reflection we've heard today. I'll be conscious not to try your patience too greatly, because at the close of these remarks, it's my pleasant duty to announce a minor round of pre-Christmas gift giving. Yes. The most common message coming out of our panel today has been the paramount importance of choice. The most common message coming out of the panel today is the paramount importance of choice. Trained people to work with individuals, their families and their existing carers maximises choice. Having those trained people, as our panel have made it clear, will be the key to the success of the system at the coalface, the interface, at the ground level and the grassroots, whichever phrase you prefer. Now, while this is the case, I must say that I was sitting next to Mum while the panel was on, and there is one thing there. Mum was not automatically against the idea of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Negatives often propel positive action. I think one Bruce talked of not accepting a crap system. And it was also pointed out by Tracy that one of the reasons that has impelled her to be so interested in this issue is that others shouldn't go through what we did. And that, I think, for many people is a negative that propels you to be far more active than you would be if you didn't know a disabled person, if you weren't a disabled person, or if you had a purely academic or intellectual or social or economic interest in the issues. This is a good thing. Because of this, crusades are made, revolutions develop. Both have their, as any student of history will know, their risks. And one thing to keep it all on the level is that we have to understand that although actions may be spurred by a reaction to a circumstance that is unacceptable or intolerable, such as a broken system, we must accept the imperfection of the system when it begins. It's not going to arise fully formed. In fact, so long as human beings have anything to do with it, it will never be perfect. But the idea that we can improve it through trials, and the trials as a learning experience, as was pointed out, means that when it does become universal, we will have already found the most common imperfections and remedied them. And those that arise will arise because of the infinite variety of human experience, and they will remain a challenge, but we will then have a trained core of people who are expert not only at solving known problems, but identifying those that arise and devising solutions to them as we go on. So, in closing, before I bring that to a close, I'll just say that the imperfections are fine, and I would like to believe that the fact of community, or the importance of community, is what draws us forward in devising this program. The idea of the Australian Fair Go is very important. It's salutary for us to remember that there are very few societies in the world where the concept of fairness is so firmly entrenched in the national ethos that this could garner the support of both major political parties in what is otherwise a very, very toxic and combative arena. The fact that you could have Tony Abbott and Julia Gillard agree on anything is a miracle in the year of our Lord 2012. But it doesn't, the fact that others agree, and that it came from a democratic temper. It didn't come from the top down. It came from people within the community pushing up, and that's the greatest and most heartening thing. And because that is a tribute to the democratic processes in Australia, I would like to crib some words first uttered by, and you'll recognise where I got this from, a certain friend of mine who's done rather well in the world, Mr. Barack Obama of Hawaii, who said an original line here, but I'm going to crib it and say that we are, as a community, we are not capable individuals and disabled individuals. We are the united individuals of Australia. It got him elected. I thought I could use it. Yeah. Twice. Now, here we go to the finale. Excuse me while I find my page. In closing, I'd like to thank each of the presenters and participants for contributing your time and considered remarks to a great cause on an auspicious day. To express our appreciation, the event organisers representing Frankston City Council have prepared a gift pack of Oxfam Fair Trade chocolates. We believe in pleasure before health when you have to make a choice. The Fair Trade chocolates put together by the great people at Wallara, a disability enterprise of which all Australians can be proud. As most of you would be aware, products with the Fair Trade label have been verified as not involving the exploitation of poor workers in the underdeveloped world. So every purchase or social procurement of these products helps to lessen the vast gap between rich and poor on our one and only planet. First pack goes to Leah. Now, who's delivering the packs? Oh, Malcolm, please. You know, it's like the NDIS, it's not going to happen without a little bit of effort. Here they are now, right. Okay, 1 second. And the second pack goes to Bruce Bonyhady. And now to Simon. Do we have a Simon? No, hang on. I got that. No. Sorry. James?
Very good. Thanks very much.
Very good. To John. I miscalled you Simon, but you can have one. And to Terry. There we go. And that's all right. And so, thank you for being here. Oh, sorry. Oh, great! I'm off your Christmas card list. I probably should not proceed until we've finished the package. Right.
When the medical model says she can't have them.
The social model says she has to. Bruce, as you're sitting next to her, just think of it as insurance.
And the last one, of course, is for you, Ken.
Oh, yes. Thank you very much. Wonderful. Thank you. Merry Christmas to you too, Mel. So, thank you for being here. When it comes to establishing an NDIS that could be the envy of the world, you have all shown yourselves willing and able. Thank you.